Howdy. This is going to be a bit of a different type of review just because it's more of an overview. It's not somebody without hundreds of miles and thousands of hours with the boots. I will not be keeping them. Therefore, this is what you will get. And since doing two things at once, such as walking and talking, it's a little bit complex for my brain. The pacing on this will be a little bit slower. So these are the Belleville, I think 10, I don't know what that is. It's just Belleville C320. This is a military approved boot. It is also one of the lighter weight for military boots. I'm guessing the military's moved away from the old-fashioned big heavy boots, probably the same reason that the other ones have, such as the logging, wildland fire, and similar, because the big heavy boots, kind of like the old adage, 1 pound on your foot equals 5 pounds on your back. So, and I definitely find that boot weight weighs you down more than a few extra backpack pounds of weight. So I do think there is some truth to that. And I don't think I have anything else to say with the weight for that. They say the weight on these is 20 ounces per boot. So pound is 16 ounces, therefore a pound and 4 ounces. I don't have a scale on me, so you will not be getting the non-freedom measurements in this video. You can do the translation yourself. Regardless, it's lighter weight than most of what else is out there. The only other one, I'm not in the military, but the most recommended military boots I've seen have been Garmin's and Belleville's. And Garmont, I think it's an Italian company, they originally had two models. God, I hope this wind noise doesn't fuck this up. They have two models, one a lightweight model and one a more heavier weight rucking type of model. The heavier weight one probably weighs more than this. I think it's about maybe 3 pounds. If not, it's just around the same ballpark. The lighter weight one is less than this one, but I think the reason I'm mentioning this is not only are these the two most recommended companies. The Garment NFS, I believe, was made kind of to be designed around being a running shoe. And this shoe, the Belleville C320s, same concept. It was made around a running shoe last. I'll give you some context here. You have a very light kind of upper here, and if you basically see yourself removing the upper, it's a very chunky looking shoe, but it kind of looks like a Hoka. Something that you would see in a very cushioned shoe. Like the nurse shoes, where I could see why, even though I'm more of a less cushioned person, I could see why they went with it. Nurses go with the Hokas, for example, because they're walking around on hard surfaces all day and have long shifts, and the soldier is carrying a ton of weight, often in excess of 100 to 200 pounds, or around that range. So I could see why that they would go with a very cushioned version. And now, an alternative to this one is not military approved, but it's made by Belleville as well. I've mentioned it in previous videos, is the mini mill. And the mini mill, I think, weighs 20 ounces. So 4 ounces less per shoe, so basically a half a pound for both. That one is much less focused on cushion, and that one was more designed around running a barefoot shoe. Although I don't believe that one is a barefoot. I think it's got like a 1 to 2 millimeter lift or something that people complain about to this day. So I'm not an extremist on either end of the cushioned argument, but yeah. Reason I don't like the ultra cushioned shoes like this one, again to give you context, how thick that boy is. I find when going up elevation in particular, and I'm in an area that has a lot of elevation, just even if it's not heavy, it feels like you're dragging around a big club. So it's almost like your muscle memory for your foot, believe it or not, your foot has a lot of muscles, has a harder time adapting, and you're more just trusting the cushion to take the footfall rather than adapting your foot. When my foot is this far off the ground, it kind of feels like Spaceman or something, like you're an astronaut, and you don't have to focus so much. You can see why the benefit of that is, though, and I'm sure if I was carrying 100 to 200 pounds, I would want this level of cushion. Now there's another model in the Belleville range. This one is not made in the US. By the way, the C320 is. The other one is called the TR550. That one weighs about a half a pound more than this one, total, I believe. So that one's about 3 pounds. But it is lower to the ground, just because I think it was designed more as a mountaineering type boot. Whereas this one's more of an all-purpose, based on a running sneaker. Which we'll go there in a sec. But the TR550, if you want to kind of more closer to the surface but still durable, that's what I'd look at. They also have a version of that one that has Gore-Tex, and not Gore-Tex, but it's waterproof, and it's got insulation in it as well. As you can see with this boot, it's a suede, or the side of the leather that's less durable, but typically when it's out like this, it breathes a little bit better. So you can see that rough surface there. The nice thing about these is it hides marks a lot better, and then often you can just rub them out if you do get some type of scratch or scuff in it. But on the con side is that it soaks up water like a sponge. Now you can take something like Obanoff's LP leather preservative. Oh dear God, the wind. Then that can make it fairly water resistant, but I don't know if this is the type of boot that you would really want that. When I got these, I really wanted to kind of experiment more with an extremely breathable boot, and then just being more comfortable when it's wet. Not here, but a lot of times the environment I'm in is wet all year round, about 9 months of the year at least. So I've usually erred on the side of Gore-Tex and all sorts of protection, and I think that's kind of been the historical philosophy, but it's sort of what this boot is based on is zoom in on, is a jungle boot. which is made in Vietnam. Probably different from the environments that the American soldier was used to fighting in, just because you're talking about an extremely wet environment versus something like you might see in Europe where you might get a heavy rain. So the jungle boot though has, let's get you in the light here, kind of like this. These side panels, I believe they probably used to be cotton. These ones are now nylon. I think it's 1,000 denier ballistic nylon, and then just some webbing here for the part that's supposed to create tension. As a boot that kind of, the philosophy was different. I think the general boot philosophy, at least how I've seen it, has been, I just need a pair of boots that are going to keep me dry for 8 hours from the outside. They'll soak up some sweat, they'll soak up some water, but after the shift's over, you can put them up somewhere. They'll be dry by morning, and you're good to go. Whereas jungle boot, probably more with military ethos, that if you're going to be out there for several days or weeks or months, you might not have the luxury of having your boots dry like that. So maybe we can make something that can dry a lot quicker, but that also comes with the cost that it's just going to get wet much easier. And so, as you can see here, there are breathing holes here. So in theory, it's on both sides, by the way. So in theory, when you're walking, the air that's probably getting pushed around inside your foot is getting expelled, and with that, some of the moisture as well. So not only do you probably have the leather absorbing a certain amount of sweat, you also have the breathing holes supposedly purging out the humidity. So I think the interesting thing with this philosophy is that you're more just saying, well, I am going to get wet. Maybe not in this environment today, but you're going to get wet from sweat. And as long as it's comfortable wet, maybe that's going to be okay. I think that's something that a lot of people that have been outside for the first few times in particular, trying to find the perfect gear, whatever's out there that's going to feel like being in an air-conditioned room. And the truth is, you're never going to find it. So the alternative is learning to adapt to an environment and making it comfortable. I think part of that bad philosophy is that you've had people spending a lot of time, what's the right word? Chasing Gore-Tex and all this fancy technology to find something that is going to last them forever and feel like their office or their bedroom. But the truth is, you're never going to get that. You're just going to be, I mean, when you're outdoors in Mother Nature, you have to adapt. And it's probably good to have something that can adapt with you. And unfortunately, Gore-Tex does not adapt too well, contrary to what they say. I'm going to pause here for a second and then I'll get into a better spot. Alright. I'm just going to sit down here in a minute. I had a rattlesnake around here, so I kind of have to look around. So despite what I said before, I think this is a great boot. It's just not for me. I'd probably give this boot even a 4 out of 5 because I think the weight is an achievement. Alright, do we have a snake here? Alright, I think we're good. So, let's give this a gander. So once again, this is Belleville C320. We got ballistic nylon, suede. We got the Vibram outsole and the thick boy midsole. Midsole here, they say is polyurethane, which I'm surprised by the way, because polyurethane is a foam that typically weighs more than EVA. So I'm kind of surprised they didn't go with EVA. Consequence with EVA is it tends to break down a little bit faster. EVA is a material in Crocs and running shoes, so I guess that makes sense for a military boot. Polyurethane's problem is if you leave this in storage for a few years or you leave it in a wet environment for too long without letting it dry out, the foam can break down and then you'll be without a midsole or outsole. As you can see, we've come on. But I would expect this outsole to last about 1,000 miles, assuming it stays attached. Been a little bit disappointed. These came. So this front lip here is not foam because that's not there's midsole, but this part is not midsole. This is actually stitched from the sole onto here, so it's not a full stitch. It's just in the front and the back. But right here, it seems like there'd be a little bit better quality control attaching that, because I'm guessing it's stitched and glued. It's kind of on both sides too, ironically. It's not on this side of it, but right here. But yeah, just so you know, it's stitched in the front, not on the sides. And then there's that tiny amount of stitching in the back. So, guessing, I've tried on a few Bellevilles before. I'm considering the price, I don't think that the employees are, I don't think the quality control is very good. I'm just going to leave it at that. Before I comment on worker conditions. A lot of Bellevilles that are not made in the US, that's most of the ones I've bought, and I've had no problem with those ones. Well, I've had problems, but nothing that I couldn't manage to fix. So these cost me $130, but I paid for them as a former government worker. I get discounts. I think usually they run closer to 160 to 200. One problem I've run into with Bellevilles before, for some reason every boot they've ever made is there is not a lot of flexibility. I don't even think that's the right way to word it with the lacing. The problem I've run into with them is I almost always, they're high volume boots basically. So there's a lot of room from the floor bed to the top for my foot. Now I do have a skinny foot, so that's probably why I'm running into the problem, but I've always found that I have to tighten the boots about as much as possible to get a good fit, because there's just too much room that's allowed with the usually the heel, the instep, and then the arch here when I'm lacing the boots. So unfortunately, I usually have to throw in an insole inside there to be able to bulk it up a little bit so that I can get a good lace, because it's sort of like escalates your foot, if that makes any sense. What else was I gonna say? Such a weird way of filming, oh my god. My apologies, I'm not used to this style. I usually just run off of a script. But yeah, so that's probably one of the biggest cons I run into with Bellevilles. I think I'm just gonna bring this inside and go over the rest, and I can take it off and show you. But well, just give me a sec. On to the boring technical part of the overview. This is the outsole, obviously. Once again, it's Vibram. I'll probably repeat some information. My apologies in advance, but this is my own limitations of being me. As you can see, we are a pebble collector with the outsole here. I have not had any issues with this outsole. I have not been able to use it in muddy conditions, but I'm in a very rocky environment, and I have had no issues in a lot of times with more barefoot type boots that don't have a lot of tread. My foot ends up slipping around quite a bit, and it has not been any issue with these ones. So I would expect that these would work quite well in most environments. I've even tried going up rocky terrain with them in sort of a more loose pebbly type and not had a lot of slippage, so I don't have any problems with that. I'm not a mountaineer or anything of that nature, so I'm not going to give it a 5 out of 5, but I would say a 4 out of 5 in terms of traction and the quality of the outsole. Plus, I think this would last. I think you could probably get 800 to 1,000 miles out of this outsole, which is, I would say, pretty good for a boot. The midsole's cushion here, again, it's very thick. It's thicker than I like. Let me find something to compare it to. So here's the Vivo Barefoot Magna ESC. As you can see there. Now this one I even consider thick. This one's 11. The outsole's 11 millimeters, I believe. And to me, it's still a little bit too clunky, just to what I've gotten used to. Here's the Belleville Mini Mill shoe. This one's the Mini Mill boot's the exact same outsole as this one. It's just the shoe version. This one I consider perfect. This one's probably, I don't know, 8 millimeter of an outsole. So it's a thick boy, but it's not. What you have to understand is that a lot of times it's not even the outsole that's the thick part, it's the midsole, just because there's so much cushion in here. And I would not be surprised with the insole if there's, gosh, 10 millimeters of cushion. This is the insoles, by the way, that they come with. As usual, I usually throw them out because I don't like them. I'm picky. This one, though, is actually very comfortable. And once again, I can see if I'm carrying 100, 200 pounds. This is probably the type of insole I'd want. It does not breathe well, though, like a lot of insoles I found, and a lot of times, kind of like what I talked about when I was walking, the feeling like you're on cloud nine, the cushiness. I don't like too much cushiness. I just don't feel like I've got foot balance on the ground because I'm so elevated off of it. If I did use these, I would probably take some type of poker and punch holes into this front part of the outsole so that some of the sweat could dissipate throughout the day. But it's actually a good midsole. It's a good insole. It's just not something I'd use. I switched mine out for something thinner just because I wanted to feel closer to the ground. I have this Freet ETPU insole I'm using. So you can see some of they have holes punched in here. The ETPU I've found is the superior form of cushioning. It's a polyurethane, kind of like the midsole here, but it's supposedly by some scientific method that's beyond my comprehension. Has more rebound, while still being able to be thinner. Maybe not so much from here, but the back part here is much thinner than this part. So there we go. These air holes here, just so you know, you can see there's fabric under here, so these are not a direct link to the inside, if that was your impression. I find they're already so far off the ground that, you know, you're not going to really walk into many puddles. Well, don't let me be the judge, but I don't deliberately walk into many puddles that are like, at this point, it's about 2-3 inches off the ground, that it would immediately go into here and make your whole foot wet. Once again, you kind of have to embrace that anyways, but I don't see that with these. I'm guessing this liner that you can see through the holes there is like maybe a chambrel. It's meant to absorb your sweat. And then when you're stepping, it's maybe pushing air out of those holes while ideally pulling out the humid part of your sweat. I'm going to put this flashlight through here and just so you can see it's not too thick. Kind of like the 1000 denier nylon. Now that would get wet too. You could probably wax it fairly decently and make it fairly water resistant, but at that point you'd be losing quite a bit of breathability as well. Just to give you an example of the conditioner I use, this is Obanoff's LP. I mentioned that when I was walking. This is a wax-based preservative. This one is what wildland firefighters use. It will do a pretty damn good job at making it water resistant and then also treating the leather. One problem I found with suedes is that they tend to purge the oils inside pretty quickly, and a boot without oil will crack and then your leather's screwed. So you definitely want to at some point put some type of conditioner on these. It will darken the leather. Not all conditioners do darken it. This one I'm going to throw out there. I've mentioned this in the other videos. One problem with these type of conditioners is that since it's wax, I believe this is called direct attach, where they use basically $1 million machine to attach the upper here to the midsole, and it forms some type of a bond. So I don't believe that this is glued. The fact that it's side stitched here though means that it probably at some part there you will experience some delamination. One problem with the wax is that waxes can get, especially for glue, they can get inside the crevices there and help delaminate them. And the more that it starts to peel, the worse eventually you're going to be without an outsole and midsole. This one is a water-based. There's actually some companies that will void your warranty if you don't use their proprietary conditioner, because they know that if you use a wax-based, that there's a chance that you're going to get delamination. So this one, the water-based is a little bit more friendly to delamination. However, the water-based does not penetrate as well and is much less likely to long-term hold into the leathers like a wax-based would hold the oils in. This is what I always use for any boot that's might be delaminated by any way, is Aquaseal glue. I don't use shoe glue. I've found it fairly ineffective. So I would recommend you get something like that, because at some point, like I mentioned before, something like this might pop out and you'll want to glue it back, tape it up, and leave it for 24 hours. I know I mentioned over it a little bit. There's two types of what you would see as suede. There's just a suede, which is basically they've cut let's see here, where's my other boot? So this is like probably a full grain leather. And so this is the strongest side of leather. The suede is more of an interior part of the leather. Now, if you just flip a side that's got this, it's considered something different. Unfortunately, the name's not coming to me right now. And that's usually a stronger version just because it's more at the surface is the stronger the leather, whereas a suede is basically cut they've cut this layer entirely out, this upper layer here, and gone with something that's deeper inside the grain of the leather, which is more of a looser weave. I don't think that it would be a problem for the life of this boot. And again, these usually will hide scuffs really well. It's actually a fairly thick suede. I'm usually fairly disappointed in suedes because they're usually just looking for the cheapest form of leather. But I think they might have actually chosen this for a reason and not just because it's cheap. So again, outsole I gave a 4 out of 5. The leather, just because I think that it's made to last the life of the boot, I'd actually give the leather, I don't know, a 3 or 4. I don't know if I'd ever in my past life give a suede a 4, but I might give it for this one because I don't see any problem here. My main thing would probably be the fact that you have this tough elastic toe. So when you are creating some level of abrasion against it, instead of it just pushing in and sliding off like here it's going to actually run into it. So you're more likely to get a nick in the toe. And especially if you're not, squatting like this, where you're using the outsole for its intended purpose and you're actually just rubbing the leather there, well, it's going to strip that leather clean off eventually, and then you'll be screwed. So just something to keep in mind. If you're in the military, you probably can't do anything fancy like put a plastic toe cap on top of this or just put a bunch of glue to give it a top layer. But yep, so I think that goes over the materials. For the design and fit, I went over it already a little bit. The size on this one is a 10 US men's. I am a 10 US men's. I don't know what the deal is, but Belleville has obnoxious sizing. A lot of times companies, like I've complained, well, I don't know if I've complained, but I've mentioned the Australians have a weird system before. I won't go into detail because it doesn't apply, but the Belleville tells you to go a half size down with these. So in theory, I am a 10 men's US. I should have gone a 9.5 men's US. I'm not a very good listener though. Now these ones, the mini mill shoes, I have an 11 men's US. They recommend you go a half size up on mini mill boots or shoes, but they recommend you go a half size down on their boots. I don't why they can't get their sizing right and just have one uniform sizing and say, well, hey, this is what I used for this for Belleville, so this is what I should use for that, is beyond me. But for everything else that's not their mini mill, they recommend a half size down. I usually size up because I want a wider fit in the toe box. Now these are a wide, but I'm not sure what orientation this is going to be. But it's not wide enough for me. And that's also why I went wider on these. The mini mills are a wide shoe compared to this guy here. As you can probably see, it's a little bit more foot shaped, but the toe box is inset just a little bit too much with these. For me, this one is a little bit just, I don't think you can see it there. Just basically my big toe should be going more straight forward and not curving in like that. So for some reason, they just think that, well, wide means that this ball of the toe should be wide, and it's okay if it curves inward here. This should kind of stay straight until about here before it curves in at all. So unfortunately, you get more of a, I don't know, an almond toe, even though it is wide for me. And that is why I went a half size up for these ones and way up on the other ones. I would say for the average person, go based off of the recommendation. If you don't need an ultra wide fit, go a half size down, and I think you'll get a better fit. It's led to my problems too with having a low volume foot already. These ones though, leading to design, their lacing is always bad. I don't know what it is. It's almost always bad. This one is the least offensive of their offensive lacings though. Again, I always have to tie these at the tightest. I want a flexible lacing system, and I actually use it for these ones. And because I can, with these ones, I can change out the insoles. So for these ones, I've used this insole here. On these ones right now, I have a thick wool insole just for summer, because if I have sweat, it'll just pick it up. And these wool ones here are actually pretty hefty, but it doesn't bother me at all with the fit, because all I needed for that extra fit was that extra big toe length. So I can add that volume with the insole, and then when winter comes around, well, I could switch back, or rainy season, I could switch back to something thinner, and then I can put on a second sock like this one, this neoprene one. So if I do want something that's waterproof and warm, and even if you're sweating on the inside, it still stays warm because it's neoprene, I could do that too. So I can essentially wear 2 layers of socks in here. And I don't need a summer and a winter version of this. It works for all of it. And that's part of the why I sized up on this one. This one, it would work, but just not as well, just because, again, I'd be running into the big toe issue. So unfortunately, Belleville, you just don't understand what a wide fit is entirely. But it's, I'll give you a clap, because it's better than many shoes versions of wide. They almost always seem to get it wrong. So it's not, wide doesn't mean foot shaped, it just means it's wide at the ball usually. So as for design on this though, as I said when I was walking, this really does feel like, yes, they designed this base to be a shoe. You can almost just remove this and it's just a thick shoe that just so happens to have a pair of gaiters attached to it. These really aren't going to give you much what's it called, ankle support. So in fact, I really wouldn't even get these if you want ankle support, because it'll be minimal. It's not none, but it's minimal. And if you over tie this part of it, you'll, for some reason, I don't know, I think it's the buttons, I don't even know what you'd call these, there on this quick laces here, dig into your leg a little bit. So you really can't tie these too much. These are basically designed so that you can tuck your pants into your boots, snake bites, brush, things like that. However, compared to the mini mill boots that I used to have, this holds firmer than the mini mill boots. I've always found the mini mill boots, when you're tying your shoes, you get to the tops and you tighten them, and it just tightens the top, and then for some reason the bottom always gets loose. For whatever reason, this one has done a really good job at that, just because when you look at the lacing system, like these bottom 2 laces are really holding in your arch of your foot. These ones here are holding in your instep down here, which is why you have this webbing here. And then up here, it's just holding your, to the bottom of your leg. But you really need all of these to function independently in tightening. And you can't have one part over tighten, or else the other parts fall apart essentially. If this part's loose, your foot's going to slide around on the inside. If you don't have these ones, you're just not going to lock in your heel to the back there. So a lot of times when you're tying to this upper part, this part loosens and you're screwed. But with these ones, I found one, they tighten pretty well down here. And then up here, it functions, it just seems to function independently, which is kind of why I keep illuminating that it feels more like a shoe. This part feels more like just, oh, hey, there's a gaiter attached to the bottom of this shoe, rather than this is just a, one big boot. You have this fairly narrow part here that's not designed for what you would think a traditional boot would be, which is ankle support. It's got other functions to it. So I do think it's a very good design. I always like it when they put a cutout here, because it means that it flexes a little bit forward better, like that. And it doesn't feel like it's rigidly holding your foot into one shape that you don't want. And I think that about covers it. I definitely recommend this boot, especially if you're in the military. The only reason I would look at the garments instead, the NFS at least, is if you want the lightest weight boot. But I think the garments would not last as long, because the garments use an EVA foam, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a weaker foam that will, the foam will stop working. It'll stop giving cushion after about 500 miles. And I do think that one has a less basically depth to the outsole and would wear down faster. So while that would probably be more of a comfortable long like boot for running or walking or whatever, you would be paying for more boots more often. I think this one's got a really great balance in terms of weight and durability to it. And even though I typically hate cushion boots, and that's basically the reason why I will not be keeping this, I actually have not had any, like even with other shoes that I consider a little bit too clunky for me, like these Vivo Barefoots, I have gotten knee and even occasionally hip issues with using these long term. So these ones I typically just keep around for the outdoors. I think it's partly, I don't know, it's just because it's got such a fat bottom, but, and there's just so much weight to that. But with these ones, I actually have not had any comfort issues to complain about. They're one of the most comfy boots I've actually ever worn. Ironically, especially with these insoles here. And I'm pretty sensitive, and I would usually criticize a boot or shoe if I found that wasn't comfortable for standing around, but these are definitely one of the best I've found for that reason. So I can see why that they're highly recommended in that regard. So I think that about covers it. I don't think I have anything else to say about this. The one thing I would do is if you're wanting like a cushioned shoe or cushioned boot that you want to last a few years, it isn't too expensive, it's made in the USA, this is your boot. And it has some level of customization if you do this, if you get wide and size up, like I mentioned with the other things. Again, I could take out the insoles and rock the neoprenes in there if I needed waterproofness and warmth. So I much prefer a customizable boot, especially with what I said in mind about the polyurethane. You don't want to have these just as your summer boots and leave them in a spot over winter or over years even that the material here would break down. Yeah, I'd much rather have a boot that can work in virtually most conditions. So the one thing I would keep in mind is, like I said before, I don't think Belleville has the best quality control. So I would be quick to, when you buy these, to use them, check them, make sure that there's not any problems with them. Make sure the stitching on here is good, the front and the back. Make sure that there's nothing too egregious sticking out. It does seem like with Belleville boots, a lot of times there's faulty stitching somewhere. So I would definitely wear them and get ready to warranty them if there's going to be an issue early on. Because if you haven't had an issue after, X amount of time, you're less likely. This is just some stupid saying I'm making that makes no sense probably, but so I'm not going to say it anymore. But basically, just be quick to use the warranty if there's a problem. But beyond that, I think that covers everything. And yeah, I'd recommend these. I'd actually give these a 4 out of 5. I don't have a lot I could fault them on because I really hate boots. I hate how heavy they are or cause discomfort. But a boot that can try to trick you into thinking it's a shoe is a really solid boot. And this one, it definitely accomplishes a job at acting like a tennis shoe. It's just not the type of tennis shoe I'd wear. So, yeah. Even if you're not military, I think that these are a great pair. And I'm actually going to keep using them because I want to try to convince myself that I like them more than I do. So,